Wayne Gretzky scored 894 goals in the National Hockey League. That alone would make him one of the greatest players in the history of the sport. But here's the part that breaks your brain. If you erased every single one of those goals, all 894 of them, Gretzky would still be the all-time points leader in NHL history on assists alone. 1,963 assists. That is more total points than any other player has ever accumulated through goals and assists combined. Read that again. His assists, just the passes, beat everyone else's entire career output. Gordie Howe played professionally for 32 seasons across 5 different decades and finished with 1,850 points. Gretzky passed him and kept going. Jaromir Jagr, one of the most durable scorers the game has ever seen, finished with 1,921 points after playing until he was 45 years old. Gretzky beat that number with assists alone and still had almost 900 goals sitting on top. He won the Hart Trophy as the league's most valuable player 9 times. Not 3, not 5, 9. 4 of those were unanimous selections, meaning every single voter looked at the rest of the league and said, there is no debate. He won the Art Ross Trophy as the scoring champion 10 times. He recorded over 200 points in a single season 4 separate times. No other player in history has done it once. In 1982, he scored 92 goals in a single season. 50 of them came in his first 39 games. He was on pace to score over 100 before the calendar even turned. Opponents didn't just respect him, they feared him in a way that had no parallel. He saw plays 3 moves before they happened. He didn't skate past defenders, he made them irrelevant. He turned line mates into all-stars and turned all-stars into legends. They called him the Great One, and for once, a nickname undersold the truth. So how good was Wayne Gretzky actually? And is he really the most dominant athlete any sport has ever produced? Wayne Douglas Gretzky was born on January 26, 1961, in Brantford, Ontario, a small industrial city about an hour southwest of Toronto. His father, Walter Gretzky, was a telephone repairman for Bell Canada and a hockey fanatic who had once dreamed of playing professionally himself. Walter never made it past junior hockey, but he carried that dream forward with an obsession that would shape everything. Behind the family home on Verratti Avenue, Walter built a backyard rink every winter. He flooded it himself, maintained it himself, and sent his son out onto it before the boy could properly tie his own skates. Wayne was 2 years old the first time he stepped onto that rink. By the time he was 3, he was skating confidently. By 5, he was practicing with 10-year-olds. Wayne was small. That would be the narrative for nearly his entire life. He was skinny, pale, and looked like a strong cross-check might snap him in half. When he played in organized youth hockey against kids his own age, the other parents complained, not because he was dangerous, because he was embarrassing their children. At 6 years old, playing in a league for 10-year-olds in Brantford, Wayne Gretzky scored 1 goal. The next season, he scored 27. The season after that, 104. By the time he was 10, playing against 14-year-olds, he had recorded an almost incomprehensible 378 goals in a single season for the Brantford Nadrofsky Steelers. 378. In 1 year, the local newspaper started covering him, then the regional papers, then national television. At 10 years old, Wayne Gretzky was already the most famous hockey player in Canada who wasn't in the NHL. But with fame came hostility. Other parents booed him. Opposing coaches targeted him with their biggest players. His own teammates' parents resented the attention. Walter later said, "The abuse from the stands during Wayne's pee-wee years was the worst thing the family ever endured." At 14, Wayne made the painful decision to leave Brantford entirely. He moved to Toronto to play for the Young Nationals, living with a family friend. A 14-year-old kid, away from home, already carrying the weight of being called the next Bobby Orr, the next Gordie Howe, the next savior of Canadian hockey. He was none of those things yet. He was a 135-pound teenager who could see the ice better than anyone alive. At 16, Gretzky joined the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds of the Ontario Hockey Association. He was still absurdly thin, listed at a generous 5'11" and 160 pounds, though most who saw him suspected even that was generous. The knock on him was simple and persistent. He is too small, too slow, and too fragile for professional hockey. Scouts loved his vision and his hands, but questioned whether his body could survive at the next level. He scored 70 goals and added 112 assists for 182 points in 64 games. It didn't matter. The doubters kept doubting. What made Gretzky different was not speed or strength, it was processing power. He described it himself in a way that became perhaps the most famous quote in hockey history. "I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been." That sounds like a motivational poster, but it was a literal description of how his brain worked. He read defensive formations the way a chess grandmaster reads a board. He knew where every player on the ice was heading before they knew it themselves. His junior coach, Lemieux Magnificent, said Wayne would sometimes make a pass to a spot on the ice where no one was standing, and by the time the puck arrived, a teammate would be there. Not because the teammate was fast, but because Wayne had told him where to go before the play even started. In 1978, the World Hockey Association was in its final years, and the Indianapolis Racers signed Gretzky to a personal services contract. He was 17 years old, not yet eligible for the NHL draft, and already a professional hockey player. He played just 8 games for the Racers before the franchise began hemorrhaging money. The owner, Nelson Scalabania, needed to cut salary. He offered Wayne Gretzky to 2 teams, the Winnipeg Jets and the Edmonton Oilers. Edmonton's owner, Peter Pocklington, moved faster. For $850,000, he bought the contract of a 17-year-old kid who had played 8 professional games. It was the greatest bargain in the history of professional sports. Nobody knew it yet. When the World Hockey Association folded after the 1978-79 season, 4 teams were absorbed into the NHL: the Edmonton Oilers, the Winnipeg Jets, the Hartford Whalers, and the Quebec Nordiques. Gretzky was now an NHL player, but because he had already played professionally in the WHA, he was technically ineligible for the Calder Trophy as Rookie of the Year, despite it being his first NHL season. It didn't matter. He scored 51 goals and added 86 assists for 137 points. He tied Marcel Dion for the scoring title and won the Hart Trophy as league MVP. He was 19 years old. The NHL had never seen anything like this. Gretzky didn't dominate through force. He dominated through an almost supernatural awareness of space and time on the ice. He would station himself behind the opponent's net, a spot no one else wanted, and use it as his office, his command center. From there, he could see the entire ice surface, wait for defensive assignments to shift, and deliver passes through seams that shouldn't have existed. Coaches tried everything, collapsing the defense around him, assigning their best checker to him exclusively, running physical intimidation schemes to wear him down. None of it worked. He simply moved the puck before the pressure arrived. His line mates became stars overnight. Jari Kurri, a Finnish winger drafted in the 4th round, went from unknown to a 60-goal scorer playing beside Gretzky. "He put the puck on your stick when you didn't even know you were open," Kurri said. Mark Messier, already a ferocious competitor, found another gear playing on the same team as Gretzky. The Oilers were becoming something terrifying, a team built around the most creative offensive mind in hockey history, surrounded by players who were themselves becoming elite because of his presence. But they couldn't win when it mattered. In the 1982 playoffs, the Oilers ran into the Los Angeles Kings in the first round and blew a 2-0 series lead, losing the decisive 5th game in what became known as the Miracle on Manchester. The next year, they made it to the Stanley Cup final, only to be annihilated by the New York Islanders in 4 straight games. The Islanders, a dynasty in the middle of winning 4 consecutive championships, treated Edmonton like children. After the sweep, Gretzky walked past the Islanders' locker room and saw battered, exhausted players wrapped in ice and bandages, champions who had given everything. He later said that moment taught him what it actually cost to win. The talent was there, the toughness was not yet. The media narrative was familiar. He puts up incredible numbers, but cannot lead a team to the ultimate prize. The same whisper that has followed every great offensive talent before the first ring. Gretzky heard it, and it burned. The transformation didn't happen through one dramatic moment. It happened through a collective decision by the entire Edmonton Oilers organization that regular season brilliance was no longer enough. Gretzky was the catalyst, but the evolution was a team affair. Head coach and general manager Glenn Sather built the roster with surgical precision. He surrounded Gretzky with Messier, Curry, Glenn Anderson, Paul Coffey, and Grant Fuhr, each one a future Hall of Famer, each one bringing a dimension that complemented the others. But more importantly, Sather instilled a mentality. After the Islanders' sweep, the Oilers stopped being a finesse team that happened to score a lot and became a machine that could beat you in every possible way. Gretzky's own game matured in ways that the stat sheet only partially captured. He had always been the greatest passer in hockey history. Now, he became a leader, vocal, demanding, and willing to hold teammates accountable. Messier was the enforcer of team culture, the player who would get in your face if you weren't competing hard enough. But Gretzky was the standard. He set it every night by being the first to practice and the last to leave. His physical conditioning improved. He was never going to overpower anyone, but he became nearly impossible to knock off the puck because his balance and anticipation were so refined. By the time a defender committed to the hit, Gretzky had already moved the puck and was 2 steps into the next play. The Oilers also added toughness through players like Kevin Lowe, Dave Semenko, and later Marty McSorley Warriors, whose job was to make sure nobody took liberties with the franchise player. Gretzky never asked for protection publicly, but the team understood the equation. Keep Wayne healthy, and he will make the impossible look routine. In 1984, the Oilers arrived in the playoffs with 119 points in the regular season, and a Gretzky who had posted 205 points his second 200-point season. They were no longer a talented team hoping to win. They were a force expecting to dominate. The Islanders were still standing in the way, still the defending champions, still the dynasty everyone had to go through. This time, when Edmonton met them in the Stanley Cup final, the result was different. The 1984 Stanley Cup final was supposed to be the coronation of the Islanders' 5th consecutive championship. Instead, it was their funeral. Gretzky and the Oilers dismantled them in 5 games. Edmonton's speed was suffocating. Their transition game turned defensive zone turnovers into goals within seconds. Gretzky didn't just score, he orchestrated. He finished the playoffs with 13 goals and 35 points in 19 games, and won the Conn Smythe Trophy as the most valuable player of the postseason. When he hoisted the Stanley Cup for the first time, the image crystallized something. The greatest individual player in hockey history was now also a champion. The narrative was dead. A new one was born. But Gretzky and the Oilers were not interested in one title. They wanted to build something permanent. The 1985 season was arguably the most dominant in NHL history. Gretzky posted 208 points, the highest total of his career and the highest in league history. He had 73 goals and 135 assists. The Oilers stormed through the regular season, and in the playoffs, they were even more ruthless. They lost just 3 games in the entire postseason, sweeping the Philadelphia Flyers in the final. Gretzky collected 47 points in 18 playoff games. The Flyers never had a chance. It wasn't a series, it was an exhibition. In the clinching game, Gretzky recorded 3 assists, but it was Paul Coffey and Jari Kurri who provided the fireworks. That was the beauty of this dynasty. Gretzky elevated everyone. He didn't need to score every goal. He needed to make every teammate believe they were capable of greatness and then put the puck on their stick at the exact moment they were. Playing with Wayne was like cheating. Curry once said, "You just had to go to the net. The puck would find you." Haps. The 1986 season should have been a three-peat. The Oilers were heavy favorites. But in the second round against the Calgary Flames, a young defenseman named Steve Smith made an error that haunts him to this day. In Game 7, Smith attempted a routine clearing pass from behind his own net. The puck hit goaltender Grant Fuhr's leg and ricocheted into the Edmonton goal. The Oilers lost. Their run at a 3rd consecutive title was over because of an own goal. Gretzky never publicly blamed Smith. Privately, the loss ate at him. The Oilers' aura of invincibility had cracked. They responded in the most emphatic way possible. The 1987 playoffs saw Edmonton face the Philadelphia Flyers again in the final. But this time, the Flyers were better prepared and far more physical. The series went 7 games. Gretzky was at his telepathic best, reading the Flyers' aggressive forecheck and turning it against them with breakout passes that created odd man rushes. In Game 7, the Oilers won 3-1 on home ice, and Gretzky won his second Conn Smythe. He had 34 points in 21 playoff games, 3 championships in 4 years. The dynasty was undeniable. Then came 1988, and the final act of the Edmonton Empire. the Oilers cruised to yet another Stanley Cup final, this time against the Boston Bruins. Gretzky was transcendent. He recorded 13 points in just 4 games as Edmonton swept Boston, though Game 4 was famously suspended due to a power outage at Boston Garden with the score tied. When the lights came back on, figuratively, the Oilers finished the job. Gretzky won his 3rd Conn Smythe with 43 points in 19 playoff games, 4 championships in 5 years. He was 27 years old, at the absolute peak of his powers, leading the greatest offensive dynasty the sport had ever seen. And then Peter Pocklington sold him. On August 9, 1988, Wayne Gretzky was traded to the Los Angeles Kings in a deal that shook Canada to its core. Pocklington, facing financial difficulties, sent Gretzky, Marty McSorley, and Mike Krushelnyski to Los Angeles in exchange for Jimmy Carson, Martin Gelinas, 3 first-round draft picks, and $15 million in cash. Gretzky held a press conference. He cried. His wife, Janet Jones, was blamed by Canadian media for wanting to live in Hollywood. The country mourned as if a national treasure had been stolen because it had. A member of parliament called it a national disgrace. The Edmonton Sun ran a front page that simply read, 99 Reasons to Cry. In Los Angeles, Gretzky did something that might be even more impressive than his 4 Stanley Cups. He made hockey matter in a city that didn't care about hockey. The Kings had been an afterthought in the NHL for 2 decades. Gretzky's arrival changed everything. Attendance skyrocketed. Television ratings tripled. Children in Southern California started playing hockey. The ripple effects were seismic within a decade. The NHL expanded to Anaheim, San Jose, Miami, Tampa, Dallas, Phoenix, Nashville, and eventually Las Vegas. Every single one of those franchises owes its existence, at least in part, to Wayne Gretzky making hockey viable in a warm weather market. On the ice in Los Angeles, Gretzky continued to be Gretzky. In his first season as a King, he won the Hart Trophy for the 9th and final time and dragged a mediocre roster to the 2nd round of the playoffs. In 1993, he led the Kings on a magical run all the way to the Stanley Cup final. In the conference finals against the Toronto Maple Leafs, Gretzky delivered one of the most iconic performances of his career. Trailing in Game 6, facing elimination, he scored a hat trick, including the overtime winner, to force Game 7, where he scored again and added 2 assists. The Kings won the series. But in the final against the Montreal Canadiens, the magic ran out. Montreal won in 5 games, aided by an overtime goal spree that Gretzky and the Kings simply couldn't match. He came within 4 wins of a 5th championship in a completely different city, with a completely different team. That is not failure, that is absurd. On October 15, 1991, Walter Gretzky suffered a massive brain aneurysm. He nearly died. When he survived, the damage was devastating. Walter had lost most of his long-term memory. He didn't remember Wayne's childhood. He didn't remember the backyard rink. He didn't remember the hundreds of hours he had spent teaching his son the game. He didn't remember any of the goals, the records, the championships. Wayne Gretzky's father was alive, but the man who had built him, the man who had created the Great One through sheer devotion and obsession, was gone in every way that mattered. Wayne later described visiting his father in the hospital, sitting beside him, telling stories from their past, and watching Walter's face for any flicker of recognition. There was none. He looked at me, Wayne said, and he didn't know who I was. The foundation of his entire identity, the kid from Brantford who learned hockey on a backyard rink because his dad loved the game more than anything, had been erased from the Bay. One person who lived it with him. Walter eventually recovered enough to function. He relearned parts of his life. He attended Wayne's games again, though he often needed to be reminded of the context. Wayne said the experience changed his perspective on everything. Hockey records, trophies, fame, none of it meant what he once thought it did. What mattered was the people who made you. And the cruelest thing life can do is let those people forget. Wayne never stopped playing for his father. Every game after the aneurysm carried an invisible weight. The crowd saw the Great One chasing records. Wayne saw a son trying to make his dad proud, even if his dad couldn't remember why. By the mid-1990s, Gretzky's body was beginning to betray him. He was traded from Los Angeles to the St. Louis Blues in February of 1996, a brief and awkward tenure that lasted just 18 games before he signed as a free agent with the New York Rangers that summer. He was 35 years old, His back ached constantly, and the NHL had evolved into a clutch-and-grab era designed to neutralize exactly the kind of skill that made Gretzky transcendent. The game had gotten slower, heavier, more defensive. The neutral zone trap, perfected by teams like the New Jersey Devils, turned the open ice that Gretzky thrived in into a minefield of obstructions. And yet, even diminished, he was still remarkable. In his first full season with the Rangers, he scored 97 points at age 36. He was no longer the fastest thinker on the ice, but he was still faster than almost everyone else, like a Ferrari losing 100 horsepower, still faster than anything else on the road. His final game came on April 18, 1999, at Madison Square Garden. The Rangers hosted the Pittsburgh Penguins. Gretzky scored 1 goal and added an assist. When the final buzzer sounded, the Garden crowd gave him a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Players from both teams lined up to shake his hand. Jaromir Jagr, who would spend the next 2 decades chasing Gretzky's records without catching them, embraced him at center ice. The NHL retired the number 99 league-wide. No team, ever, would issue that number again. It belongs to one man. Wayne Gretzky skated off the ice for the last time, and the sport he had redefined exhaled. 20 professional seasons, 4 Stanley Cups, 9 Hart trophies, 10 Art Ross trophies, 2,857 career points, numbers so absurd they look like typos. Think about the arc of this story. A skinny kid in Brantford, Ontario, skating on a backyard rink, his telephone repairman father built by hand, practicing until the ice turned to slush and his mother called him inside. A child so gifted that grown adults booed him from the stands because he made their sons look invisible. A teenager who left home at 14 because the jealousy became too poisonous to endure. A young man told his entire career that he was too small, too slow, too fragile to survive in professional hockey. And then for 20 years, he didn't just survive. He rewrote every record the sport had ever established and made the game itself bigger than anyone thought possible. What makes Gretzky's legacy impossible to fully capture is the consistency. This was not a player who had one magical season and rode the memory forever. He led the league in scoring 10 times across 11 seasons. He posted over 100 points in 16 different seasons, 15 of them consecutive. He was the best player in hockey from roughly 1980 to 1994, a span of nearly 15 years, during which no one else was even in the conversation. Bobby Orr's peak was arguably more revolutionary, but it lasted 8 seasons before his knees destroyed him. Mario Lemieux's peak was arguably as talented, but injuries and illness robbed him of his prime. Gordie Howe's longevity was arguably more remarkable, but he never dominated a single season the way Gretzky dominated a decade and a half. Gretzky combined the peak, the longevity, and the impact in a package no other hockey player has approached. He also changed the geography of the sport. Before Gretzky went to Los Angeles, the NHL was a regional league concentrated in the northeastern United States and Canada. After Gretzky, it became a continental enterprise, 9 expansion teams, billions in revenue, children playing hockey in Arizona and Texas and Florida. You can draw a direct line from that trade in 1988 to the Vegas Golden Knights winning the Stanley Cup more than 3 decades later. One player reshaped the business of an entire sport. Not through endorsements or marketing, but by being so captivating that an entire nation of non-fans started paying attention. The case against Gretzky as the greatest hockey player of all time typically rests on 3 names: Bobby Orr, Mario Lemieux, and Gordie Howe. Bobby Orr revolutionized the defenseman position. He was the first blue liner to win the scoring title, the first to change how teams thought about offense from the back end, and at his peak, he might have been the most electrifying player the sport has ever seen. His case is legitimate and deserves respect, but Orr's career was devastated by knee injuries. He played only 12 NHL seasons and was truly elite for about 8 of them. Gretzky was elite for nearly twice that long. Orr changed the position. Gretzky changed the scoreboard, the record book, and the map. Mario Lemieux is the ghost that haunts the debate. In terms of pure, raw, natural talent, Lemieux might have been Gretzky's equal, or even his superior. At 6'4" and 230 pounds, he had size, speed, hands, and vision that were almost unfair. But Lemieux battled Hodgkin's lymphoma, chronic back problems, and a heart condition that robbed him of hundreds of games. In the seasons he played, his per-game production was breathtaking, but he played only 915 career games compared to Gretzky's 1,487. The what-if of a healthy Lemieux is the greatest hypothetical in hockey history, but hypotheticals don't count in the record book. Gretzky showed up every year for 2 decades. Gordie Howe is the patriarch. He played until he was 52 years old. He was tough, durable, and productive across 5 decades. His longevity is superhuman. But Howe never had a single season that approached Gretzky's peak. His best year produced 103 points. Gretzky eclipsed 204 times. Howe was a marathon runner. Gretzky was a marathon runner who also sprinted faster than everyone else in every single mile. The statistical gap between Gretzky and everyone else is not a gap, it is a canyon. 970 points separate him from the second-place scorer in NHL history. No sport on earth has a distance like that between first and second. Not basketball, not football, not soccer, not baseball. In virtually every major statistical category, Gretzky holds the record by a margin that makes the debate feel almost disrespectful to the other candidates. He is not the best hockey player ever by a small margin. He is the best by a margin so vast that the argument is really about who is second. Wayne Gretzky was a 160-pound kid who couldn't bench press his own body weight, and he became the most statistically dominant athlete in the history of professional sports. He proved that vision, intelligence, and relentless preparation can overcome every physical limitation the game throws at you. He didn't just play hockey better than anyone else. He saw hockey in a way no one else ever has before or since. If you want to know how one dynasty changed everything about basketball, watch our video on the 1990s Chicago Bulls. That story starts with a similar kind of obsession, but it ends in a very different place.